What's happening, guys? Gary Jahman here, back at it again with a new video. Hope you're doing well, hope you're safe and happy. So in this video we're going to talk about the Sony ZV or ZV-1F, and I have to admit I was quite surprised by this little guy. So yes, it is a very small camera, but it actually feels quite good in the hand, even though the grip is non-existing. So I would suggest using something like this, a small tripod, to use in combination with this little ZV-1F. But I have to say it is nicely built and it feels quite firm. According to Sony, it is actually made from recycled materials and even less plastic, so that is of course a nice thing. The touchscreen works pretty fine on the menu and to change things around, but somehow you cannot change the aperture or shutter speed with the touchscreen. For this you will need to use the circular button to change things like the shutter speed and aperture, which is actually quite strange. And sometimes it might be a little bit of a hassle. But I think for most people they won't even bother with it because they just put everything in auto mode and you're good to go. In general, the build quality is pretty solid. So let's talk about more interesting stuff, and that is the image quality for both photo and video. But let's talk about photo first. And as you see, straight out of the gate, straight out of the camera, it actually looks pretty good. Keep in mind though, you cannot shoot in RAW, which means they don't have the flexibility to do a lot of things in post. But I have to say the JPEGs coming out of this camera are looking pretty nice. The photos have good colors, they look quite organic, and also they are pretty sharp. Photos in low light are always a challenge for small sensor cameras, but if needed, it's still usable. I do think that for making thumbnails it will be just fine, and also for capturing like once in a lifetime moments it will do a great job as well. If I have to compare the image quality from this camera towards a, let's say, a smartphone, I would say that the image quality from the Sony ZV-1F is a tad better than from a smartphone. But definitely not as good as a real camera, such as a micro Four Thirds sensor, full frame sensor type of camera. So for just using this camera for photography only, I would not recommend it, but still, if you really had to, you can have some good time with it. Now the image quality for video. So this camera was meant to be your first vlogging camera, your first like beginner's camera to create online content with. And in general, we want to know, all right, that's cool and all, but what about the image quality? Are the videos, do they look actually pretty good or not? So let me show you and let me tell you. This little guy can shoot 4K up to 30 frames per second and also 1080p all the way up to 120 frames per second for slow motion, which is pretty awesome. But here's the thing, the straight out of camera image, so if you don't touch anything, just press record, you don't touch anything, I think that the image quality for video is not the greatest. For instance, my face, what you're seeing right here in this little example, it looks a little bit strange. The colors don't really match how they are in real life. Somehow this camera has a weird color definition straight out of camera. But luckily, for me at least, and for a lot of people like that want to do a lot of tweaking in their colors, you can shoot in a so-called log profile. And within this log profile, the one that I choose is HLG. You can also use S-Log, but the one that I choose is HLG, and here you can just tweak things around and then you got a better image quality. So you have to keep in mind, if you want to have a better image quality, shoot in a log profile. But if you don't want to tweak, just leave it on a standard profile mode or a creative look, as they say in the Sony world, or select a different creative look and tweak from there if needed. But again, for me, the straight out of camera look is not very appealing. But there's one huge downside of this camera, and that is the so-called rolling shutter. I won't tell you like the technical details of what a rolling shutter is, but I will show you, and it just means that if you move the camera too quickly, you will see that straight lines are not straight anymore, or like faces will be very blurry or skewed. So make sure to keep your camera steady as much as possible. Don't do something like this all the time, like, oh, I want to look at something, oh, here it is. right? So keep it steady, keep it smooth. And what about the low light conditions? Is this actually pretty good? Well, here is an example. And as you see, things become very muddy, but still usable if needed. Quick recap in general for both photo and video, with some tweaking, at least for video, the images are quite impressive. I think it looks really good, but for photo straight out of the camera, it looks better than the straight out of the camera for video. For video, I would suggest using something like a log profile, or at least tweak things around a bit. Now let's talk about the performance and features of this little camera. First of all, the autofocus performance for both photo and video. I have to say it's not very reliable. I think that's because of the contrast detect autofocus, so it's not always continuous. For photo, as we see right here, when you move things around, it will just focus on one point, but it cannot track like directly, so you have to refocus again. For video as well, there we have better autofocus, but still not as reliable as I hoped for, like in the other Sony cameras, but still it is okay, and just don't move your face too much because then it will somehow lose you. There's also a little feature called product showcase where you can just like move things in front of your camera and it will detect that you're showing a product, let's say for a product review or something. But then when you move things away from the camera, like your product, move that product away from the camera, it will slow down a little bit with autofocus and try to find your face. So for me, the autofocus performance could be better. There's also a nice little feature called the defocus, which means that it will blur your background a bit. But for me in general, this does not add anything extra because the defocus option is like a very minor thing, and I'd suggest just not use it at all. The active stabilization in this camera is an electric stabilization, and it will crop your video a little bit, not that too much. And I have to say it works a little bit for video at least. For photo, it doesn't work at all. But for video, I think
stabilization is on.
okay.
How does this
I was
look?
quite impressed with the microphone and the windshield, or the dead cat. And I have to say, I was outside with some windy conditions,
Bright
and
light.
things were actually sounding really good, as you hear right now. Now let's talk about the battery. The battery life is okay for a half day, but for a full day of filming, let's say you're on a day trip or a city trip, whatever, I would suggest buying one extra or maybe even two extra just to be sure that you can capture the full day. But luckily, charging the battery inside of the camera goes pretty fast. So let's do a little recap. We got good build quality, nice specs, image quality is pretty impressive once you have tweaked it. Autofocus performance could be a little bit better. Overall features are okay, the microphones are really good, and the battery life is also quite decent, right? Now the question, do I recommend this camera, yes or no? And the answer is yes. For online content creation, this comes in very handy. It is very easy to use. And also with some tweaking, you can definitely use this as a full-time online content creation device. And for beginners, I think you can learn a ton of things with this camera. So yeah, this thing, the Sony ZV-1F, this little guy right here comes in highly recommended. Alright, so there you have it. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel if not already. And if you got any questions about this camera, let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, stay safe, stay happy, and I'll see you in the next one. Good luck. Alright, so this right here is shot on the Sony ZV-1F or ZV-1F in the HLG profile mode, log profile. And as you see, it actually looks pretty good, but still you have to keep in mind that if you shoot in a log profile on a smaller sensor, you will not get the same results, right? But still, it looks pretty good. And this right here is straight out of camera. How does this look? Does it look better, or does it look a little bit off? I think it's a little bit strange looking. I'm not sure what to think about it, but you know, it works straight out of camera, but still I don't think it is really up there on the same level of quality when you shoot in the log profile. And maybe if you want to be a little bit more dramatic, then you can also shoot in black and white. It all depends on your own creativity and how far you want to go with editing the image in post, right? But if you are somebody that doesn't want to take a lot of things in post, then just shoot with the standard profile or select one of the creative modes.
De mooie views van ons weer.